Hello and welcome to Transformations Cafe, where we're serving light as bold as love. I'm your host, Ken Marks, and Transformations Cafe is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation. We're a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization whose vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world, both individually and collectively. We invite you to visit us at theglobaltransformation.org. If you want to join our community, click the join button on our website. And if you'd like to support our work, including programs like this, there's also a donate button, which will help you get over to PayPal. This program is being recorded and will be published soon after we're done on IFGT's YouTube channel. So we invite you to also please subscribe to that and select the bell icon to be notified when we do post new material. Our live audience is invited to participate in this conversation. And so if you would like to, those of you here right now, you can come on camera with our guest by typing the letter Q in the chat, and that'll be my cue to know that you want to speak directly. Otherwise, type your question in the chat and I will read them and do my best to get to as many of those as we can. So with that, I'd like to introduce and welcome back very heartily to Transformations Cafe, Dr. Yvonne Kason. I would like to also read a slightly updated bio for those who may not have seen our previous program where we interviewed her and talked about her work in a third program regarding Dr. Kason and her work. So Dr. Yvonne Kason is a family physician and transpersonal MD psychotherapist, retired. She's the author of 6 books and a public speaker previously on faculty at the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. She's the president and co-founder of Spiritual Awakenings International. Dr. Kason has had 5 near-death experiences and multiple spiritually transformative experiences. And she first coined the phrase spiritually transformative experiences, or STEs, in her groundbreaking 1994 book, A Farther Shore. This term has now been adopted by foremost researchers in the field. She's an internationally renowned expert on spiritually transformative experiences and is in demand as a media resource and keynote speaker internationally. So we're again thrilled that Yvonne, you've decided to join us here on Transformations Cafe. Yvonne had a powerful near-death experience, or NDE, in a 1979 medevac plane crash, which propelled her to become the first Canadian medical doctor to specialize in research and counseling of persons with NDEs and other spiritually transformative experiences. A pioneer in the field, she co-founded the Kundalini Research Network, the Spirituality and Healthcare Network, and Toronto Awakening Sharing Group. She's also a past president of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. Dr. Kason is a mother and grandmother, congratulations, and a devoted longtime practitioner of yoga meditation. She speaks 3 languages, English, German, and French, and divides her time between living in Toronto, Canada, and snowbirding winters in Encinitas, California, or down here in the Sunshine State of Florida in the USA. As I mentioned, this is the 3rd program that we've had regarding Yvonne and her work. So I want to encourage our audience to watch our earlier programs, and we'll try not to repeat much of the content that was in there. Our conversation today will be centered around Yvonne's latest book, which is titled Soul Lessons from the Light: How Spiritually Transformative Experiences Changed My Life. With that, Yvonne, welcome back. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much for having me.
At the outset, I did mention this, not to cross myself up right at the beginning in one of the previous interviews, but in reading this latest book, it was brought back to me something that I just want to thank you both personally and professionally for everything that you have done with your life in this area. You really served. Pioneer is kind of a nice label, but you stuck your neck out and
Mhm.
endured so much of what so many others of us worry about enduring, and either haven't had the courage to do this or the calling or whatever it was. But it really just struck me again of how much you've done, and actually made it both so much easier for so many others now to step forward and to bring these experiences more and more into kind of just the common discussion, so that they're so much less unusual and weird. Because I think that, usually people tend to be classified or think about this, but you really put up with a lot and a lot of insult. You risked a ton professionally as a physician. And so I think it's worth highlighting that and noting and thanking you directly again for that. So
Thank
um,
you for that.
I also wanted to thank you again for the reference to uh, Dr. Bonnie Greenwell. This is also something that she was someone so instrumental in this field as well, and you pioneered together. Just leave it to women to have the courage. And she was someone who made a huge difference in my life, and I had the chance to participate in the last Kundalini Awakening webinar that she put on for a group of us all over the world. And it was very life-changing for me. First time I had a chance to actually meet other people and realize I wasn't alone. And so just to see her name again kind of warmed my heart. And I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that the two of you started the Kundalini Research
Yes,
Network.
we did.
Yeah. So it makes it that much more special also to have the chance to see you again, to work with you. Since our last interview with you, our organizations have become formally affiliated, so we're grateful for that as well, and looking forward to SAI's upcoming third annual conference in June. Looks like a tremendous slate again. So what I thought we would do again, so that we don't cover the same things that were covered elsewhere, is not so much focus this conversation on either the definitions of STEs or your personal stories, except where you wish to bring them into the conversation, but talking about maybe some deeper things, as well as this was a much more personal book.
Yes.
So I thought maybe we'd start out and just maybe give you the chance to talk. Well, why did you write this book, and what did you want to share that you hadn't already done so with us?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Ken, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I also just want to say my respects to Dr. Bonnie Greenwell. We were very good friends, and she did pass away about a year ago. And, I was blessed to, that spirit brought our paths together, and we co-founded the Kundalini Research Network back in 1990. And we called each other spiritual sisters. We were actually called the Kundalini Sisters. That's what people used to affectionately refer to us as. So that's quite something. And you can imagine back in 1990, you think Kundalini is a word that's unfamiliar today. Try 33 years ago, nobody'd heard of Kundalini awakening. So it was really, like, what do you call it? It's like, so like a single light in the dark. At least
Yeah,
there
did
were two of
anybody
us
ask
who
you if
could
there was
support
an
each other.
Italian pasta they hadn't heard of before?
Anyway, but you asked me, why did I read this book, Soul Lessons from the Light? This is my new book. Just so I know, how many of you that are listening have actually read it? Just show me your hands. Has anybody read it, or is it nobody? Okay, so Ken's the only one in the crowd who's read it. Thank you. Well, it is
highly recommend it. Highly recommend it.
It is my newest book. It just came out 4 months ago, and it is my first and only memoir. So it is my story. And the reason I wrote it are many reasons, but it's particularly special to me because it's a product of the miracle. And I try to get that message across to everybody in the book and when I speak to them, because some of you may not know if you've not read any of my books or don't know my story. But yes, as Ken said, I've had 5 near-death experiences and multiple spiritually transformative experiences. And I've been working in this field for many, many years as a pioneer and a groundbreaker. But in November of 2003, which was my last near-death experience, I had a slip and fall accident in Niagara Falls, Canada, and I hit my head on the cobblestone pavement. I fell on black ice, suffered a really serious traumatic brain injury with a brain hemorrhage, and died. I had a profound near-death experience. I'm going to tell you about it in a second, but I'm going to jump afterwards. But it disabled me. And it disabled me for over 12 years. And during that time, I thought that my previous work out in the world, being a medical doctor, writing books, talking, was over, that for whatever reason in the divine plan, that chapter was closed, and that now, after my brain injury, I was a disabled person, and how I could serve spirit was just privately through my prayers and meditation. And, I went to neuro rehab for 7 years trying to get better. But, you have to come to a point of acceptance that for whatever reason, this is the hand that I was dealt, and to trust there was some higher purpose. And so I accepted that my quiet inward life of dealing with my bodily challenges, and then how I could serve was just quietly, privately, my prayer and meditation. But much to my surprise, as I mentioned, over 12 years later, so in 2016, in February 24th, 2016, which I was meditating at the Self-Realization Fellowship Retreat in Encinitas, California, in a power spot, and being very intuitive, because although I was disabled, I'd not lost any of my intuition or spiritual understanding. I was meditating on a power spot. I've always been very, very sensitive to power spots, and find that I go very deep quickly if I meditate in a power spot. I was meditating there in this spot where Paramahansa Yogananda, the great yogic saint, used to meditate and go into samadhi, which is higher consciousness. And all of a sudden, while I was meditating there, inwardly, I perceived this eruption of light in the center of my brain. And it was like a volcano erupted. It was like liquid light flowing, illuminating the center of my brain. And I had this inner experience, like literally the lights came on. It was like the center part of my brain had been somehow in darkness for the last 12 years. And suddenly the lights came on. It was like luminous. And at the same time, I had this feeling of waking up. It's like the center of my brain woke up, and my brain was healed. So I had this incredible STE, which was a miracle, a spontaneous brain healing through the grace of God, grace of Yogananda, who knows? But I had a spontaneous brain healing. And with the brain healing came the very strong inner intuition, or the download: pass on what you have learned. And then inspirations for writing books were just flooding through my consciousness. It was like a floodgate had opened. And I felt like I'd been pregnant for 12 years in my consciousness, been locked in, and suddenly the babies want to come out, the books want to come out. So the ideas were just flooding through my consciousness. Now, this book is the second book that I wrote, gave birth to after that brain healing experience. My first one was Touched by the Light, that I previously spoke to your group about. And this is my second one. So this is one of the reasons why this book is so special, and why I wrote it, is that it's the product of a miracle. And it was part of that gush of spirit saying, pass on what you have learned. And this was definitely one of the books that I was being guided to write. It's also special to me because, as I mentioned, it's my story. That the books that I wrote before my head injury, I was still a practicing doctor, a practicing medical doctor affiliated with the University of Toronto here in Canada. And so I always felt somewhat constrained, that I had to be very careful in terms of how I worded things and what I said or didn't say, so that I wouldn't, hopefully be stepping on people's toes in such a way that, the medical governing bodies would come after me or something. So I felt constrained in certain ways. I think you can all understand that. But now, after my traumatic brain injury and being disabled for 12 years, in the middle of that process, I retired from the practice of medicine. So I'm retired now. So now that I'm retired, I don't have to worry about anyone taking away my medical license or revoking my malpractice insurance or anything like that. I felt free for the first time after this healing, now that I'm retired, that I can really share much more openly what I think and some of the experiences that I felt. I had to sort of keep under my hat a little bit, or just sort of share only little bits of it. So it's been wonderful to share these things. And to me, the other reason is, I mentioned I'm a senior now. And the message that I got so clearly when my healing happened was pass on what you have learned. And so it's a very strong feeling in me that maybe part of the reason Spirit healed me is so that I can pass on what I have learned to the next generation. That there's a younger generation they're going to need this information too, that I developed through a lifetime of experiences and research, and that they're going to be looking. And I feel that the world is more receptive now, that I feel like there's a spiritual awakening happening on the planet. I feel that there's something happening on the planet. And I feel that COVID was actually a part of it, believe it or not, in the sense that what happened with COVID is that it drew people online. That is one of the things that it did. And, in the middle of COVID, I got the very strong spiritual download. I hope all of you are familiar with that higher guidance coming. Sometimes you call it downloads. It's so strong, it feels like a computer download of instruction. Okay, I'll do it. All right. But I got a very strong download to found a new organization, which Ken had mentioned, Spiritual Awakenings International. I was even given the name, and I was given the date it was to be launched. The person I was to launch it with, Dr. Robert Baer, who I'd not known before, Spirit brought our paths together. He got the download too, to found this organization. It was born or launched in June of 2020, which you may recall was in the height of COVID. Everything was locked down, planes weren't flying, borders weren't open. And so we had originally envisioned it to be something that we would have live meetings maybe once a year. But it soon became clear, I guess we're creating an online organization. And so what did that result? Because we didn't know, we created this organization. We told a few people that we knew about it. So it has just blossomed and grown. Spiritual Awakenings International has subscribers now in 78 countries around the world, which to me is just, it blows me away. And to me, it's just a testimonial of God is great. God knows what she's doing. And there was a reason that this online organization with a really generic name, Spiritual Awakenings International, which is much more generic than, say, Kundalini Research Network that I founded back in the 1990s, that it was being launched now during COVID because people were online and people were searching. The other thing, I'm just going to mention it here. I don't discuss it in my book, but we're just talking, is that I also think COVID may have played a role in accelerating people's spiritual awakenings. because there was all this talk about death, right? There's all this fear of death. I mean, there's people dying, people who are dying, or maybe you yourself had it and people were having near-death experiences when they were close to death with COVID. So all these different things that are sort of like spirit invisibly prompting people, pushing people in a more spiritual direction. So, my last near-death experience, let me talk about that now, if I may, Ken. I know I'm not giving you much of a chance to ask questions, but that one of the lessons that I learned from my last near-death experience that I'm about to talk to you about, and actually I learned it from some of my earlier ones too, but it was very much confirmed and much stronger in my most recent near-death experience, is that there is a divine plan, that there is a higher power, there is a divine plan, and that divine plan is perfect, whether we understand it or not. From our perspective, we can't see the perfection. We tend with our egos to see the imperfections, right? What we perceive as imperfections. But from the higher level, when I was on the other side, I could absolutely see and absolutely understand how the divine plan is perfect. And that there's a happy ending for everybody, that over many incarnations as we come here, and it's like a school of life where we keep coming back because we've got more lessons to learn, more grades to go through. But that eventually, over many lifetimes, we're all going to graduate, and I mean, we might get stuck in grade 7 math for a few years because we're particularly having trouble with that particular soul lesson, just using that as a metaphor. But the plan is, so somebody's pointing, yeah, that's me stuck in grade 7 math, that eventually the divine plan is that we're all going to make it home. And that is so wonderfully beautiful. And to have experienced that and to know that to be true has given me great, great, great strength and peace of mind when struggling with some of the very real struggles I had to deal with after I became disabled with my traumatic brain injury. So let me very quickly, if I can, just tell you about my last near-death experience in 2003. November the 8th, 2003. So what happened that day was I slipped on black ice at Niagara Falls. I fell back. I hit my head really, really hard on the rock cobblestone pavement. I suffered a really severe traumatic brain injury with the brain hemorrhage and lacerating both my frontal lobes of my brain. Felt like an axe had chopped into my head, like this searing pain. And it was just there for a second, then poof, it was gone. And my spirit was whisked up out of my body by a force greater than myself. Now, I have to stop here because I need to tell you what happened the 2 hours before I was whisked out of my body. Then I'll get back to where my body went. Because I went to Niagara Falls to meditate. I love to meditate at the foot of the falls. I don't know if any of you have been there, but the roar of the falls is really wonderful. And I love to go to the platforms and the tunnels at the base of the falls, underneath the falls, because the roar of the vibration there is like the inner Om vibration. And I find that if I would meditate there, that it would help me. I could go very deep, very, very quickly. So this particular evening, I was standing at the base of Niagara Falls and holding the railing there, looking at the falls, and went into meditation. And I went really, really deep, really, really fast. And I entered a state of communion. I entered that state of oneness. I entered that state where in my consciousness, with my eyes open, I could see the world around me, but I could also see the other side. I could see the realm of astral light, astral heaven. I was in a state of oneness, and I felt like I was home, that I'd made it, that my spiritual search, my spiritual effort was successful. And I felt this great joy. I saw a being of light, a saint from my spiritual tradition. It was Mahavatar Babaji, appeared in the white light realm and telepathically said, "Welcome home." And I remained in that ongoing state of communion for 2 hours. I went later, had dinner with a friend in the restaurant, and then in that state of consciousness, I fell and hit my head. Now, the reason I'm coming back to tell you this is Spirit's prompting me to tell you this part. It's in my book if you want more details, but I think that might have been my end of life experience. You know how we've all heard about people shortly before they die? It's like the veil between this side and the other side gets thin, and often they'll start talking to like their departed spouse or to a saint from their spiritual tradition. And I now wonder, gee, maybe that was my end of life experience. I mean, Dr. Peter Fenwick theorizes that everyone dies enlightened, and that this is what this experience is shortly before people die. So I look back on that now and I wonder, oh, was this the good Lord preparing me for the transition? But I didn't know I was about to die. I thought, that my spiritual efforts had finally borne fruit. And maybe it was both, who knows? But anyway, so I'd had that profound experience for 2 hours before I died. And when I died, it was, as I said, I just suddenly, this force greater than myself had whisked me, or my point of perception, or my soul, I'll call it my soul, out of my body, and I was being very rapidly raised up through a dark space. Some might call it a tunnel. To me, it was like a dark space towards this realm of light. And there actually seemed to be like a doorway, that was radiating, like that entranceway. And I knew where this was. It was the white light realm that I'd been to before in my medevac plane crash experience. Of course I wanted to be there, but I was whisked there really, really quickly. But this time, different from any of my other experiences, I was greeted at the doorway by two beings of light that I immediately recognized. And they were saints from my spiritual tradition. They were Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji. And they telepathically welcomed me and explained to me that my body had died, that my work, in the incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason was finished. And there was this feeling of joy, this feeling of incredible love, and even something different. It was like a celebration. It felt like a graduation party was being held for me. Like, you did it, you made it, you successfully finished your mission and you're here. And it was just this incredible feeling of love and joy and congratulations. And there were other beings of light in the periphery. I couldn't make out, like my ego wasn't functioning. So I didn't see like distinctive features, and I wasn't trying to figure out who they were. It was just this feeling of love, like this whole chorus of souls who loved me were there. And the only two that I recognized were Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji. And I remember my ego must have been like sort of a little bit there on the back of my shoulder, because you know how they have cartoons with the devil standing on your shoulder, putting little thoughts in your mind? Because that's sort of what happened to me next, is that it was like this little voice on my shoulder went, uh-oh, here it comes. Because, I had learned through all my research and talking with so many people who'd had near-death experiences that people who've actually died, like completely died during their near-death experience, often got a life review. And so this little thought came up in my ego mind, uh-oh, here comes the life review, And I mean, I've tried to be a good person in my life, but like anyone else, I've made mistakes, and I didn't know what, was going to be brought up in my life review. And I really was not looking forward to it. I've heard they can be quite unpleasant. And it was really interesting because the two saints, like, they absolutely read my mind. Like, they absolutely read my mind. Like, I'd only thought this little part of me had thought it. And one of them turned over and looked at me, and with the glance, it was like, just with the glance, it was like the energy, the information, the love. It was like that little demon on my shoulder got blown away, like blowing a fleck of dust off my shoulder. And with it came this incredible, beautiful understanding. And the understanding that was transmitted to me was don't worry. Because just like a loving parent, when a child is learning to walk, you realize it's going to make mistakes. It's going to stumble. It's going to fall. It's going to skin its knees. Maybe it's going to bump its head. Maybe it's going to fall on something and break it. But the loving mother or father, loving parent, doesn't punish the child during these learning experiences, but instead embraces the child and encourages them to try again. And with, it's okay, honey, try again. You'll do better next time. That was the kind of love that was welcoming me onto the other side, complete unconditional love. So you made mistakes, don't worry about it. And with that, my heart could just expand and relax and just bask in the incredible unconditional love of home, of our true home, of my true home, of all of our true home. And then what happened was I sort of shifted into, it's hard to know how to describe it. It's not a different place, but maybe a different state of awareness. I shifted into a place in consciousness where I was no longer seeing visual things, but it was like my consciousness had now expanded in its capacity of pure thought, that I turned from a Pentium 2 into some massive mega computer that could take in a vast amount of information all at once. And I could just suddenly, like all at once, I remembered all of my past lives. And then the experience when I remembered all of my past lives was, oh yeah, right. Like, I've always known that. How could I have forgotten that? It's like, oh yeah, that's right. That's my life journey. And as I remembered all my past lives, it was like an aha experience that suddenly my incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason made sense. Because I'd always felt my incarnation was a bit odd. That here I am, I'm just this little doctor practicing in Toronto, Canada, and I'm having like Kundalini awakening and near-death experience after near-death experience and clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, past life recall. I mean, I could write the book on STEs because I'm having all of them, right? So, and it made no sense to me from an ego perspective of this one incarnation, why, this little doctor here in Toronto is having all these experiences. But with the memory of all of my past lives, it just completely made sense. It was, aha, now I understand, of course, because I've been having these experiences for many, many, many incarnations. This is not my first time being a mystic. This is not my first time with a Kundalini awakening. This is not my first time with near-death experiences. So from a soul level, my soul was just sort of carrying on from what it was before. But when I was in this incarnation with my ego consciousness, I was unaware of it. And so it was like a bit weird. But from a soul level, it wasn't weird at all. It was me. That's what I am. That's what I've been for many incarnations. So, okay, you got it. And so there was this real sense of finally fitting in my skin, if you know what I mean. It's like, I get it now. This is me. Yeah, this is the way I am. And there's a great comfort and a great feeling of safety and security to remember who I am, because I always was that. I just had forgotten it while I was in the physical form. And there were many things on the other side that are just too difficult to explain. But I do want to share one other thing that's really quite, for some reason, I think it's important to share, which is how the passage of time is so different on the other side. That on the other side, while I was in this state, shall we call it, of pure consciousness and bliss, that there was a very clear awareness of how what we here on earth perceive as past, present, and future, how we perceive it linearly and quite separately, that is not how one or I was perceiving it on the other side. It was as if they were all happening at the same time, and that it was only a matter of where I focused my concentration, whether I would be aware of and perceiving what we here on earth perceive as the past, or I would be perceiving what we here on earth perceive as the present, and what we here on earth perceive as the future. And it was really clear to me too that time can bend, that time can loop on the other side. For example, my experience on the other side, I call it timeless time, felt like it was very long, and much that I observed and learned. But when I later came back to my body, my dead body, it seemed that less time had passed here on earth. So it felt like, I had gone out, had this big, long experience. There was this movie with Jodie Foster, what was it called? Contact or something like that, where she went out into space and she had this big, long, long adventure. And here on earth, like 1 second passed or something like that. That's how it felt, that I'd had this really long experience, but here on earth, it was not the same period of time. Anyway, after a period of, there's much more I could tell you, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. So after a period of what I call timeless time, the two beings of light reappeared to me, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, and they telepathically communicated to me, you may now choose to incarnate in the body of a babe to further serve the divine, and the choice was and or to go back to the maimed body. And I remember I was in such a state of complete openness, complete trust, complete surrender, complete knowing of the perfection of God's plan, that my heart instantly responded, oh, masters, please guide me. What is the higher choice? I want to do God's will. And so lovingly, so sweetly, exquisitely sweetly, how a thought can be that exquisitely loving, it's impossible to describe. They telepathically communicated to me, it will be more difficult, but to return to the injured body. And immediately my soul responded, I accept. And it was between the I and the accept that with a gasp of air, I found myself lying on the ground in my dead body, starting to breathe life back into my body. And it felt like waking up in an ice cube, because it was outdoors in winter in Canada. So my body temperature must have dropped after I died. And for the first few minutes, I guess, when I was breathing life back into my body, I could see both realms at the same time. I could see the physical world all around me, and I could also see the white light, heavenly, astral heaven realm, whatever we want to call it. It was like two pictures that had been superimposed one on the other. I could see both at the same time, completely superimposed on the other. And then what happened is that the realm of white light, the astral heaven realm, slowly after a few minutes started fading from view, until slowly it just became like a dot in my consciousness. And then I was back in my disabled body. And the reason I went into the story was I wanted to share the lesson, what a key lesson that I learned. And then I'll throw it back to you, Ken, for some further questions if you have them. But I just absolutely knew when I came back, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God's plan is perfect. Whatever we call the higher power, it doesn't matter, Allah, Brahman, Great Spirit, the Force, it doesn't matter. The higher power, I use the word God, that the plan is perfect. The cosmic plan is perfect. And that there's a happy ending for everybody. And at whatever stage we are, playing whatever role we've been called to play in this great melodrama we call life here on Earth, that from the higher perspective, it all makes sense, that it's all leading to the happy ending that we're all going to eventually be, you know, like a real complex novel that you're in the middle of it and you go, how is this ever going to work out in the end? When you're in the middle of it, you can't figure it out. But when it gets to the end, you go, oh, I see how that all fits together. And that was sort of how it was on the other side. I could see that, wow, all of this eventually is instrumental in getting us to our happy ending, getting us home. And this was so helpful to me because, you know, when I came back, just because I'd had a profound and powerful near-death experience did not mean I did not have human feelings and human reactions and psychological reactions and physical challenges, all that stuff. And, you know, people can sometimes say, you know, I had post-traumatic stress afterwards. I mean, it's a big deal to be a high-functioning medical professional, then to become completely disabled, right? And I went through years of neuro rehab trying to get better. And people would sometimes say very cruel things like, oh, you must have some really bad karma that this happened to you. And I remember it was like this force field would come up in me. No, no, I'm not even going there, because I knew so deep in my heart that even though I didn't know why, there was some loving higher purpose to me being disabled, and that it was not a punishment. And I have this phenomenon where sometimes when I'm asking Spirit a question, Spirit guides me to a book, and I open up the book and I read on the page, and there is the answer to the question I was looking for. And so, you know, at some point when people were really poking that negative interpretation at me, you know, okay, Spirit, okay, Yogananda, why is this happening to me? And then, boop, I'd get a book. I'd be guided to, I'd open it up, and it was, oh, the stages in a yogi's life. That at the age of 50, you get to give up your worldly life and go into the forest to seek enlightenment. Well, my head injury happened to me when I was 50. And so I went, oh, is this my spiritual opportunity? I don't have to work in the world anymore. Yes, I'm disabled, but hey, I can seek enlightenment while I'm disabled. So that's how I chose to frame it. And I coined this term, I called it spiritual retirement. When you make the goal of your retirement to spiritually deepen. And I had such trust in this. And I mean, but I'd have to battle it because, you know, doubts come in there, you know, and I had days that I'm feeling down, feeling discouraged, you know, I have trouble getting my disability insurance, trouble paying bills, you know, all this sort of stuff, the practicalities of life. And then Spirit would remind me, you know, think back to the other side. And it was like a life ring in the storm that I could hang on to and know not only that we are all loved and that it's a happy ending for all of us, but to know that I am loved and that I will get a happy ending. And so that was profoundly helpful for me. And that is one of the soul lessons that I wanted to share with you today, and that I share in my book, is, you know, that the higher power is real. We come here again and again in order to learn and grow. That the plan is good, even if we don't see it in the immediate. And that one day we're all going to make it home. And then I have one final little lesson I want to throw in, which is no matter how difficult or challenging your current situation, miracles can happen because I am a walking testimonial to a miracle happening. That, medical science doesn't say you heal 12 years after brain injury. They say if you're not healed in the first 2, maybe 3 years, like that's it. It's permanent. Well, if God wants you to heal 12 and a half years later, you'll heal 12 and a half years later. And so this book is a testimonial to that. And that's part of why it's so incredibly precious to me, is that I birthed it after my brain healing. And so I'm really delighted to share that story with you.
Yvonne, thank you so much. You've done something that can't be done adequately just in reading or seeing a reenactment, but there's something just so more compelling and helpful, I think, to hear the passion in your voice, see the expression on your face, and to know it's all very real and very true. And as you said, there seems to be a increasing number, with also some, I believe, increasing velocity of more and more people having some form of awakening. So either, and many of these are associated with various forms of STEs, but they don't all have to be.
Mhm.
And so I think the fact that you also make so much of yourself available through doing interviews like this, through the work that you've done, writing these books, you shared most of the key soul lessons that are described in the book. There is one other that I made note of, that meditation and moral living can speed soul evolution. And I didn't get the sense that moral living meant that you had to, swear off drugs and alcohol if that's your thing. It's more of the stuff that we know what's right and what's not, that having compassion, being kind, being considerate, doing those things that replace fear with love, basically, I think is what I took from that. And that's another key thing to know, because so many of us, not to shortcut our spiritual awakenings, but to be validated or have it verified that yes, it's worth keeping your practice going. And we may fall off the track once in a while, but these things do make a difference. And that was helpful, at least for me, to read. So I thank you for sharing those lessons. There's one other element of the book that, if we have time, I'll get us into, but I want to make sure we maybe kind of cut to the chase, because I'm feeling like some dots are being connected. Like, here we are, we've talked before, you're sharing your story in depth. We've already discussed the apparent phenomena of more and more people on the planet having awakenings. And so I'm just curious if you can share your thoughts, or maybe even have some knowing of, as we talked about this in our previous interview, this phenomenon that IFGT talks about, reaching the tipping point, where suddenly there's a critical mass of people and humanity that this kind of conversation is no longer kind of makes you raise an eyebrow or scratch your head, that it just is understood that these things are true, and it's no longer wondered, and it's just more and more common knowledge. But I'm just kind of curious, what do you think that things are going to be like when we reach that tipping point? When in my notes I wrote, and this just kind of came to me as I was reading your book, and I wrote this down. I said, what will it be like when we all understand that what we think is reality is actually just the version of how each of our minds synthesized or analyzed the information we perceived? It's kind of analogous to, we would see the color spectrum that is visible to the human eye and the vision functions of our brain, and kind of assume that's it for colors and light. And so that's kind of what I think a lot of our minds do. What do you think it's going to be like when we reach that tipping point?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I think what's happening today with human consciousness is that for many people all over the planet, as part of a spiritual awakening, which I do think is part of a global human phenomenon. Um, Gopi Krishna, who was an early influence in my life, a yogi from India who wrote about Kundalini awakening, uh, he thought that this was actually the next evolutionary stage for humankind. So that evolution was ongoing, and that it's not that we're going to like grow another arm or grow a tail or something like that, but that actually it's going to be expansion of our range of consciousness. That, you know, that 98% of the brain or whatever they say we're not using, that we're going to be using more of it, and it's going to be manifesting as an expanded range of consciousness. So what in the past people labeled as paranormal is becoming the new normal by experiencers like you and me and probably others in the audience here today, that we are experiencing perhaps transient glimpses, sometimes ongoing experiences of a more expanded range of consciousness. I mean, like, for example, for me, higher guidance or intuition, that's a constant ongoing thing. Maybe when I was younger, it was episodic, but over the years it got to be, so that's just how I live every single day, you know, of every decision. Well, spirit, what would you like me to do here? And I instantly get an intuitive response. And I'm not saying this to make myself special, because no, this is happening to people all over the planet, that it starts with little glimpses, and then it becomes more frequent, and then it becomes an ongoing thing. That's just a part of how you operate now. Some people they call themselves empaths, where they're very clairsentient, where they can feel emotionally the feelings of others around them. You know, others are clairvoyant and can see auras, on plants, or can see where illnesses are in people. That this is part of the gradual expansion of consciousness, in my opinion, that is I think our destiny for everyone on the planet. But there's a point about this that I want to emphasize too, is that this is happening through direct experience, not through book learning. So there's a difference here. And I'm going to say, okay, religious doctrines that according to yoga, we're just coming out of what's called the darkest age, or Kali Yuga, where higher spiritual knowledges have been lost. And so, for example, most religions, not all of them, most religions today, they base their theology on what's written in certain books, their particular holy books, and people who've written, and it's about writing and analyzing what's written. And I think that was very necessary for the Kali Yuga, for the Dark Age. But I think that that's changing now, because what's happening is, you know, historically in the Dark Ages, there were mystics and prophets. They were these very exceptional people that really stood out in their cultures, of all spiritual traditions, who were having the direct experience. So they could talk from their direct experience of the higher power, from their direct experience of spiritually transformative experiences. And some of them were burned at the stake, and some of them were as heretics. Other ones were made into prophets. But these are people who were having direct experiences. And I think what's happening now on the planet, and relates to what you're talking about, Ken, is that we're now in an upwards yuga, or an upwards age, where spiritual awakening is happening. And according to yoga, this is the Dwapara Yuga, where we're learning about energies, we're learning about outer energies, we're learning about inner energies. So during the Dark Ages, they didn't even have a concept of energy. You couldn't talk about Kundalini and chakras and stuff like that. Energy wasn't a concept. Whereas now, the whole world understands about energy. They understand about well, if radio waves and TV waves can go through the air, why can my consciousness and thoughts not go through the air? So that our inner and outer energy understanding and consciousness understanding, it's happening together. And more and more people are having direct experiences. Now, it's not just the saints and the prophets who are having direct experiences. And so this is creating a whole new awareness. And this was part of, I think, somebody said to me, you know, Yvonne, the good Lord took you offline for 12 years because the world wasn't ready for you. And you were brought back 12 years later because Spirit wants you to come back and say what you've learned. And maybe that's true. Maybe in this 12 years, there's been more openness, like you said, to this whole concept of the paranormal becoming the new normal, that there's been more and more people all over the world having them. But there's been another phenomenon, which is the internet. So that people all over the world, like with Spiritual Awakenings International, we have these things called experiencer sharing circles. We have people from all over the world coming to these sharing circles saying, there's nobody I can talk to. Thank God for you guys. Last, I have my community, and it's the same as you. You have your community, but you have it online. And so it's like people are not alone. And as you find other people that are validating your experience, it's like we're collectively, I look at it like little lights all over the planet. We're now connecting. Okay, we're now connecting, and we're forming this mesh so that we're able to reinforce each other, and we're able to support each other and normalize each other. Now, I don't think at all that we've reached that tipping point on the planet. I think we're not even close. But at least we're at a point now through the blessings of the internet, and also because I think more and more people are having awakenings. I do think it's part of our evolution, spiritual evolution on the planet. And we're finding each other, and we're able to connect through the internet and sometimes in person if we're lucky. And so I think we are moving towards that tipping point, but we're not there yet. I look at it more like right now we're the crest of the wave. Like some people have to be the first people to brave the new frontier. So, well, we're part of the group braving the new frontier. We're part of the crest of the wave.
Yeah. And I know I want to respect your time, and we're about at the hour. We did have one person in our audience that I think might be a nice way to finish. Actually, I could keep this interview going if time permitted, Yvonne, for another couple of hours to share even more of the gold that's in the book. So I just would like to encourage our audience here and those who see this later on YouTube to strongly consider reading this and Touched by the Light. Touched by the Light, I talked before about it almost serving as a text. If you really want to understand more of the depth of this and how it crosses traditions, its linkages to some of the wisdom that goes way, way back in humanity and crosses time and geographic regions in our human history. So if you do have an interest, I really do commend that book, and then the way you kind of brought it all together and shared so personally. But one of our audience members and someone that has also been sharing more of her time and energy with IFGT, Anna, had asked if she could also share her own story. And I'm sorry, I have to ask you to keep it brief because we're at about the end of the program. But if you would,
Yes.
speak you being a walking miracle.
Okay, Dr. Kason, thank you. And I want to let you know I'm up there at the tipping point with you. My story is, and the reason why I joined this organization is I was told I was going to die 15 years ago, stage 4 metastatic cancer. And I didn't feel sad about it. I felt a little bit joy. And I still have that cancer to this day. I'm still getting chemo to this day. And I'm exhilarated to this day because I discovered, as I mentioned to people here last year, I found my purpose. My purpose is to help others with a higher consciousness. And, I'm past my expiration date. I've never felt better in my life. And my doctor, tomorrow I'm going for chemo. My doctors always make a fuss over me. The nurses do. You're a miracle. You're a miracle. So I just wanted to let you know that it is happening. It is there. It's happening.
That's awesome. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing, Anna.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna. I just wanted to make sure if there's anything else that you wanted to mention, Yvonne, that we get to that, and then we'll put links in the program notes on YouTube. But if people wanted to know where they can find more information about you or SAI or your books, just to do that opportunity as well.
Sure. Okay. So Spiritual Awakenings International, our website is spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. So you can get yourself on our mailing list and take a look at our upcoming events, particularly our conference that's coming in June. It's going to be awesome. Your group is one of the patron co-sponsors. Thank you very much for that event. So hope to see a lot of you there. And also our sharing circle. Some of you might have some wonderful things to share and want an opportunity for somewhere that you can share your circles. If you want to get in touch with me personally, you can do that through the Spiritual Awakenings International website. Or I have my own website, which is DrYvonneKason.com. Dr. Yvonne Kason, doctor spelled DR, DrYvonneKason.com. That's another way that you can get in touch with me. So thank you, all of you. You've been a wonderful audience, and I can feel all of your love, and it's really wonderful. So big heart to all of you.
Well, thank you, Yvonne. It's always a pleasure. It's really each step as we go on this path and we start to walk more together with others. As you said, we at least meet online and sometimes have the luck to meet in person. And it does help to bring this forward. And it's, again, a pleasure to know you, to hear your stories, to be somehow fortunate enough to be able to do these interviews and help spread this word, because it's part of this movement that I think is going to take us as a species and a planet to a better place. So just have to survive yourself first. So
thank you.
thank you.